We are gonna now add our outer panel to our pockets. Obviously, this is the middle of your pocket section. To find the middle of your panel, just fold it in half, mark it with a pin right there, and then you will line up this middle seam right there with the pin. If your lining is a little bit long, we will end up just trimming it off, because see how this is a little bit longer over there? We'll trim that off when we have it all lined up. Now, one thing I like to do, I like to push all of my zipper pockets to the left and fold this down to the right. So if you fold them nice and flat, you can pretty much get everything lined up pretty close. Now keep in mind, this is bag making, so it's not gonna be perfect, but you're gonna get them on here. You're gonna kind of pull it tight. I just make sure that your seam allowance here is laying flat, and pin them with pins or clips. All pinned. Check it from the underneath. Everything looks pretty good. You guys, it's not gonna be perfect, but that's part of bag making. It all evens itself out in the long run. Just make sure you try to stick to as close as a 1/4 inch seam allowance as you can. Later, we'll trim off these edges, but I'm gonna sew this one before I go to pin this edge, because I have found it's easier to work with this being pressed if you sew it and then you let it all stand up, and then we'll press that side down. Yep. So as you sew, feed it under. When you come under the thick part, like one of these seams right here, you might even have to like lift your foot up and help ease it underneath, and just go slow and be careful. Kind of work your way. Now that we have this side stitched down, I am going to flip this around, and I like to push it down again to the left, so that in theory, this side has been pushed to the right and this side has been pushed to the left. Even though you're doing them both to the left, it's just that you switched it, because I feel like that then makes them stand up straight. If I were to have pushed this one, both of them the same direction, I feel like then they kind of lay funny. So I'm going to push them to the left and find the middle of this panel. I should have done that earlier, and I'm going to repeat it exactly the same. Now that both sides are stitched, I'm going to fluff it back up, and then we are going to trim off the extra here. Now keep in mind, this is going to have a curve to it, so rather than lay it straight and push the lining out, I kind of like to feel the way it's going to feel with the curve, and then I lay that down. I know that sounds kind of confusing, and you're just going to trim it with your rotary cutter, just like this. Don't overthink it, guys. It's just, you're just trimming your lining even with your outer panel. To attach the binding, you're going to use your shorter 15-inch piece, and you're going to fold it inside with the wrong sides together, just like you do when you're going to quilt. This is my raw edge. So again, on this bag, I'm going to kind of push everything just the way I pushed it when I sewed it. And you are going to put your raw edge along the raw edge of your sew together bag. So your raw edges of both go together. I let a little bit hang off the end here, and some's going to hang off the end down here, and you will stitch at 1/4 inch the whole way down. And I typically do exactly at 1/4. I don't do more than that, because this can get pretty thick, and it's nice to have it a little bit narrower so that when you go to fold it around, and I do it because I'm going to machine stitch this binding onto the front. If you're going to hand stitch, you could probably do a little bit bigger of a seam allowance, but because I'm not, and I'm going to machine stitch it, I like to do just 1/4 inch. I'm getting ready to sew the binding, and you guys, I don't even pin it. I'm just going to put it in place as I go. But one thing I did want to mention, if you can decrease your foot pressure, I would do so, because you're going to be stitching over a lot of thicknesses. And also, when you go to sew over these thicker parts, go slow. It's really easy to break a needle. I've broken quite a few. And so go slow. And even if you need to turn your hand wheel over here on the side of your machine, if you need to turn your hand wheel with your hand just to get it to go over some of these thicker parts, like if you have a machine that needs a little bit of help, that's a good way to get over those edges, and then back stitch at the front and the back. I have the binding stitched on, and you just are gonna flip it over. And this is why I like just doing 1/4 inch, because you get your binding and you have plenty of room to stitch and catch this binding. And honestly, If you use a bobbin thread, because you're going to be sewing from the top, use a bobbin thread that's going to match this fabric right here, so that when you see your stitching, it just blends right in. And I just use these red clips and just put them on just like that. Okay, to stitch the binding on, you are just going to stitch slightly from the left in, because you want, let me show you here. See that? You want just a little bit to the left of your stitch line. You want to be right on it. And then, let me show you from the back. Do you see the stitch line there? It just matches with the side piece. The last thing you have to do for this week's homework is you're gonna just take scissors and snip off that last little bit of binding right there that sticks out from the edge. You'll do it on all 4 of your corners.